Okay, so I made a little presentation here that is talking a little bit more about art examples of capturing the essence of melting. So you can see in your assignment that you will be taking the object that you rendered using different tones from black to white, values of gray. You're using these values of gray to render form realistically, but in this drawing, you take the same object and you will recreate it melting, and you will use your imagination. So some of you are, you're all at different skill levels of maybe being able to render work from your imagination, but this is for those of you definitely who might need a little bit more help. So we're just looking at different artists who have used this kind of concept of melting within their work. And I'm hoping that it can guide you a little bit towards making your object look like it's melting. So this is a really great example. We have Salvador Dali's Persistence of Memory. This is a tempera painting, and note that it's 9.5 inches by 13 inches. It's relatively small, even though we have probably seen this image a bunch of times, and it seems rather big as we imagine it. But you'll find that throughout this entire PowerPoint that all of the work is rather enigmatic or mysterious. There's something about this quality of melting that really can take work into this dreamlike state. So as a designer, you can always have this under your belt. So I guess a little bit more about Dali. He was a surrealist painter, and a lot of the time, pretty much for all of his paintings, he would enter a very meditative state and kind of get into more of a hallucination or hallucinatory headspace and try to access his subconscious to create these dreamlike paintings. This painting actually made Dali famous by the time he was 28, and sometimes we refer to this painting as the clock painting, the melting clocks. So you might hear Persistence of Memory or the melting clocks when people are talking about this painting, but what he's doing in this is he's taking a geometric shape, and he has made it look, the geometric shape being the circle of the clock, and he has rendered it using these types of really slow compound curved contours in order to create the sensation of the clocks melting in this environment. So these are sculptural work. I know this is a 2D class, but it's really quite helpful if you want to render something to look as though it's melting, to just observe objects in real life. Or excuse me, not real life, but in the 3 dimensions. So even though this is a picture in 2 dimensions, but regardless, this is a sculpture work by Dan Lamb. Dan Lamb is Dallas-based and is doing really well within their art career, and is kind of past the emerging artist point, having a lot of shows and a lot of different art fairs and such. But they make these blob drip sculptures, and they're made from polyurethane foam, resin, and acrylic. They're actually, because they're made from foam as a base, they're really quite light, but there is this definite use of the material, which is foam and resin, and it's painted with acrylic. There's this use of the material, pouring resin over and over and over again to let the resin kind of melt down the shaft of the foam shape, creates this extra drippiness. And it's just a really great example of using sculpture to create this sort of melting like object. And Dan Lamb also uses texture. Sometimes it's rather smooth, their drippy works, or sometimes they add these little dollops, kind of like icing on a cake, that become these spikes. And their work is kind of takes on this sort of energy, and they always have these like funny titles that kind of become these little creatures or monsters or feelings. Here's another piece. I just love this piece. I love how luminous it is, the shininess of it, but I also love that it just is really wonderfully captured the movement of gravity of this object. Feels very much alive. It has this wonderful texture, and this is a really great example to look at for rendering your melting bits on your object that you chose. So using your imagination or looking at photos like this, you can see, look how beautiful these highlights are on this melted sculpture, or melted looking sculpture. You can see how organic the shapes are within the highlights. There's hardly any geometric looking highlights. They're all very, very organic. So go ahead and yeah, take a deeper look at this. I'll go ahead and put this in Canvas so you can just stare at this, and hopefully that can help you render out just the general organic shapes. And also notice like the negative space within the sculpture too. There's a use of negative space here, which kind of gives us a more even this essence of like pouring over. And I also love these little extra drips that are kind of coming off of it too. It's just these little tiny details, these smaller little refined details that make it feel like gravity is making it drip even more, drip or melt. And then this is another example, very drippy. This one also almost comes off like icicles, and I think these longer melty drips look more kind of similar to what candle wax looks like when it melts. And that's something you can consider in this project. What kind of melting does it look like? Is it melting fast? Is it melting slow? Is it melting like a candle? Is it melting like molasses? Is it melting like an icicle? Is it melting, what else melts? Like lava. So you can think of these ideas and really try to capture that speed within how your object is melting with your imagination. And I like this image because it also shows what happens when things tend to melt a lot. They tend to gather on the floor. Gravity takes the drips and it creates a puddle underneath. So that is something you can consider for your drawing, is having it maybe your object melting in a pool. And also consider the shadows that occur from that pool. And if it's, the pool of the melted object is gathering in height, of course you want to have like a little cast shadow there to signify that there is like some weight within that. This is Urs Fischer. Urs Fischer is a pretty well-known contemporary artist who works like multimedia, multidisciplined, and really enjoy Urs Fischer's work. So this is a cast wax sculpture with burning wick, and these are, I guess, considered, we can just call them a slow burn performance. So they're cast in wax, but they're something that you have to enjoy over time. And I think that there's a really interesting commentary just within this one image about just this random guy, this random passerby, and he's on his cell phone. And I think there's a really interesting comment about time. I mean, when something's melting, it takes time, right? There's something slow about it. And I definitely think there's sort of this concept that's happening within this piece where there is a message about time within the wax melting and within the look on his face and his posture being so hyper focused on his phone and screen time. And think a lot about how much screen time like wastes time. It wastes a lot of time. It sucks up a lot of time. And so there's this really interesting concept with how we normally engage with how we really use our time, I guess, and how it just kind of slowly or even quickly is just from our grasp because of modern technology and the consumption that modern technology has over all of us. Here's a little up close of another Urs Fischer piece. So this is Untitled, this piece here. Same, made in 2011 out of wax, pigments, wicks, and steel. And this was on view at the Venice Biennale. And I like this up close photo here because of, you can see where the wicks are placed. And if you even wanted, I mean, I think if you wanted to think about that too, like your drawing, when you create the drawing of your object melting, the whole top of it doesn't have to be melting. It could just be melting in certain parts. And I think that can make for even a more dynamic drawing from you. So yes, this is from the 2011 Venice Biennale. And this piece is a replication of a very famous sculpture called The Rape of the Sabine, which was created in 1583 by Guillaume Bologna, which is located in, it's currently located in Florence, Italy, and has been. And it is notably one of the most famous sculptures because it is quite a beautiful sculpture, but I just wanted to add that it is a rather disturbing sculpture. I mean, if you think about the title, The Rape of the Sabine, but it's bothersome because of this beautification of sexual violence, which unfortunately has happened a lot in art history. And a little historical background, this was created as a commentary of when Rome was founded. So there weren't enough Romans, so they would simply just go and dominate the neighboring women of Sabine and take them. And this is good to question why this mass abuse is so celebrated. As I said, this is a really famous sculpture, and there is definitely serious, it's pretty problematic, but a lot of older artwork is problematic. So I just wanted to question that and maybe tie that into this idea of melting. These pieces are made out of wax and they're melting. This is the new Urs Fischer piece compared to, based off of the famous Rape of Sabine. And I don't know, I think that there's a commentary about if this is a historical cast of this famous sculpture and it's melting, there's a commentary about maybe history melting over time. I like to maybe take a positive spin on it and think about this idea of this mass abuse maybe like melting with time and kind of shattering that norm that isn't really typical in art history. That's just kind of my personal take on it. And so adding this sort of like melting feeling, capturing this melting movement can really speak towards a concept of your object melting. So you might not really realize that until after you do your drawing, but it could be something that you can think about and maybe even write about too within your own work. So this is kind of like a before and after a shot where we can step back and see the entire sculpture a little bit more. And the sculpture also includes a wax sculpture of a guy who's just supposed to be like a passerby or someone who's engaged with the work. And so all of the aspects of this, they just start to melt over time. And this is what it ends up looking like. And they just become these really beautiful ruins. And this actually reminds me so much of like a surrealistic painting I would think about Tanguy or Max Ernst, how their work had a lot of texture and a lot of sort of movement and like melting sort of feeling, and even somewhat of a geological feeling. Like I think a lot of stalagmites and stalactites and caves and how those are organically formed. So yeah, this is just a really beautiful piece. Wish I could have seen it melting over the course of, I don't know how many days, but it's just really, really beautiful. And then the last artist we're looking at for this little topic about capturing melting or movement within melting, is these works by Alper Dostal. So these are works from an exhibition that he titled Hot Exhibition. So kind of talking about, you know, hot things melt when they're hot, like candy or like wax. And we already looked at this piece talking about value and working with oil paint, Picasso's Guernica, working with black to white and gray oil paint to create this painting. So Alper Dostal takes famous art historical pieces and then just put them into this abstract gallery setting by making them appear illusionistically that they were actually melting. So he did a really good job. I want you to just try to take a moment and just really enjoy how all of these changes of gray here, with like these one stark dark line with a little bit of a darker gray and these lighter values of gray, he's really pulled them down and then into this huge puddle where you can see some of the lighter shades of gray are located even down here, and the darker shades of course are also located on the outside of this puddle that remains on the floor from the painting as it melts. And I think that this is, all these details really, really make this super strong. Here's another one by Dostal that is Van Gogh's Starry Night, as we all, I'm sure, have seen before. Maybe we haven't, that's okay. But like bringing down these blues and stuff to make it melt, just so beautiful. And also the puddle on the floor has a nice little curved line to it as well. It makes it feel very much like kind of like water, actually. So this is just amazing because of so much movement within this piece already. The way Van Gogh uses just a series of lines to create this type of movement. The artist has used this abstraction of creating this three-dimensional form down here to make it look as though it's melting. And oh, look at this part right here, so pretty, that highlight coming down and melting into that puddle. Very nice work. And I'm not sure what medium this was made in. It's probably, I'm gonna guess that the painting that he recreated the paintings as best as he could with the original mediums, like this being probably an oil. I'm actually not sure, but then most likely he maybe used the same technique as Dan Lamb's blob sculptures to create the foam and cover it in a resin and then painted it with acrylic on top. And then here's a Edward Munch, the Scream, another famous painting that he created to look as if it was melting. And then lastly, just to tie it in to the beginning, we have some melting on melting, which is like a really cool concept. It's just kind of creating, I love this like contemporary echo of a historical work, creating melting on the melting clocks. So really kind of going deeper. I like this sort of double veil of going deeper into the subconscious, because I definitely feel like I'm entering Dali's dream that is reinterpreted by Alper Dostal's dream. So there's a really beautiful sentiment in that. And that's it. Hope you enjoyed.